Hello everybody. Today I am going to be reviewing the book Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. So let's get into it. I'm going to read to you the inside of the sleeve here that tells you what this book is about, first of all, in case you forgot, because it has been a month since I introduced this book and that this is the book that I was going to be reading this month. So, chemist Elizabeth Zott is not your average woman. In fact, Elizabeth Zott would be the first to point out that there is no such thing as an average woman. But it's the early 1960s, and her all-male team at Hastings Research Institute takes a very unscientific view of equality, except for one, Calvin Evans, the lonely, brilliant, Nobel Prize-nominated grudge holder who falls in love with, of all things, her mind. True chemistry results. Like science, though, life is unpredictable, which is why a few years later, Elizabeth Zott finds herself not only a single mother, but also the reluctant star of America's most beloved cooking show, Supper at Six. Elizabeth's unusual approach to cooking, combine 1 tablespoon acetic acid with a pinch of sodium chloride, proves revolutionary. But as her following grows, not everyone is happy. Because, as it turns out, Elizabeth Zott isn't just teaching women to cook, she's daring them to change the status quo. Laugh out loud funny, shrewdly observant, and studded with a dazzling cast of supporting characters, Lessons in Chemistry is as original and vibrant as its protagonist. And yes, I would agree with that 100% on that. I loved this book for many reasons. Let's get into it. So, what was my favorite part of the book? There are several parts to this book. I was like, yes, stick it to them. If I were to choose one part that I liked the best, though, I'd say the ending. Elizabeth once again stands her ground, and even though she speaks her mind throughout the entire book, in this sequence, she lets it all out to find the truth about her deceased lover. My favorite quote from the book is on page 38, where Elizabeth says, quote, "While we may be born into families, it doesn't necessarily mean we belong to them," unquote. What did I think of the writing style? This is told through omniscient narration. Garnis often switches perspectives mid-chapter. Characters whose points of view are described include Elizabeth, Calvin, 630, Walter, and Harriet. This narration style is especially useful in explaining Elizabeth and Calvin's unique chemistry. Now, 630 is the name of their dog, but if you want to know details about that, you have to read the book. I'm not going to give that away. How important was the setting to the story? Extremely important, because it takes place in a time where women were not accepted as, quote, a man's business, which for Elizabeth is science. The end of the 1950s and early 60s, if it had taken place any other time, I feel it would not have made such an impact on the story. For instance, if it would have taken place today, or let's say even back in the 1980s, it would have been like, so what? What's that got to do with anything? So the fact that it takes place in the late 50s, early 60s, that sets the whole scene. How did I feel, what did I think or feel about a certain topic? I felt many things reading this book. There's sadness and empathy for the death of her lover and having to raise his child alone while holding down a full-time job. The feeling of being overwhelmed with life, the feeling of being held back because you're not a man, and anger for that reason as well, and frustration. What character did I relate to the most? I would say I related to Harriet the most in this book. I'm not going to tell you who Harriet is. You have to read the book to find that out on your own. How did my opinion of the book change as I read it? I have to say that I loved it more and more the more that I read it. And that's the truth. I would read a chapter and be like, oh, that was so good. I can't wait to see what happens next. And then I would read the next and it would be like, oh my God, that was so much better than the previous one even. Yes, true story. Is this book overrated or underrated? Definitely underrated, in my opinion. What did I think of the ending? I mentioned this earlier. I loved the ending, and I would not have changed anything about it. It was the perfect ending to this story. If I could ask the author anything, what would it be? I would ask her what inspired her to write this book. This book reminded me so much, Elizabeth the Zalt reminded me so much of Miriam on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. If you have not watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon Prime, you are missing out. I loved that series. I cried when it came to an end. Seriously. Elizabeth the Zalt's character, to me, is the exact image of Miriam from Mrs. Maisel. And that is Mrs. Maisel. But anyway, so if you haven't seen that show, definitely check that out. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Lessons in Chemistry by Botm Garmis. Like I said, I got this book from the Book of the Month because, as you know, I started the subscription to it. Now, I am not getting paid at all to talk about this book or Book of the Month at all. But I gotta tell you, if you're a person that loves to read, I highly recommend Book of the Month. When you first sign up, your first book is on them, and then you pay $16.99 after that, and then you can also add books to your cart, and you can get some of those for free as well. So, I mean, you can't go wrong with a subscription to Book of the Month Club if you are a person who loves to read, because they will send you, some books are this thick, some books are thinner. I just read another book that I had ordered, a previous month's book, and I didn't like it as well. It was a smaller book, but I just couldn't get into it very well. I'm not even going to review that one. I'm not going to bother. Now, going forward, am I just going to review books that I love on here? No. Absolutely not. I had no idea that I was going to love this book. And that's another fun thing about Book of the Month is that it tells you what the books are about. But you don't know if you're going to like that book, just like the one that I ordered previously. I read the synopsis and I was like, oh yeah, that's right up my alley. I definitely have to find this book and read it. Well, I did, and I did not like it at all. I will just say that. Let me grab that book real quick. Just a second. I keep talking about it, so I might as well just tell you about it. So this was another one that I ordered for Book of the Month, and I got this book for free, and it's called A Talent for Murder by Peter Swanson. Now, this book is not near as thick as Lessons in Chemistry, and A Talent for Murder. As soon as I read the word murder in the title, I was like, oh yes, because murder mysteries are one of my favorite things in this world. So I was like, yes, this sounds really good. I don't know what to say. I just could not relate to the characters. I could not put a vision in my head. I just did not overall like this book very well. Let me tell you what it's about. A newlywed librarian begins to suspect the man she married is a murderer in this spectacularly twisty and deviously clever novel by best-selling author Peter Swanson. Martha Ratliff conceded long ago that she'd likely spend her life alone. She was fine with it, happy with her solo existence, stimulated by her work as a librarian in Maine. But then she met Alan, a charming and sweet-natured salesman whose job took him on the road for half the year. When he asked her to marry him, she said yes, even though he still felt a little bit like a stranger. A year in, and the marriage was good, except for that strange blood streak on the back of one of his shirts he'd worn to a conference in Denver. Her curiosity turning to suspicion, Martha investigates the cities Alan visited over the past year and uncovers a disturbing pattern. 5 unsolved cases of murdered women. Is she married to a serial killer? Or could it merely be a coincidence? Unsure what to think, Martha contacts an old friend from graduate school for advice. Lily Kempner once helped Martha out of a jam with an abusive boyfriend and may have some insight. Intrigued, Lily offers to meet Alan to find out what kind of man he really is. But what Lily uncovers is more perplexing and wicked than they ever could have expected. Now that sounds fascinating, doesn't it? It sounds like, oh my God, I have to read this book. Well, for some people, you know, you read the book and you're like, oh my God, yes, 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 I loved it, blah, 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 blah. You're a real fan of this book. Me, on the other hand, I was not a fan of this book. I got bored. There's just a whole lot of all at once. And it doesn't give you time to process one thing before it moves on very quickly to another. And so you're like, so for me at least, like my mind's like going everywhere. And then there's a lot of conversations between people, especially her to her husband, you know, with the questions and the discoveries and things like that. And it's just not good. I was bored, and I felt like even if this were a movie and I was watching it, I probably still would be bored with that movie. Even though I love a good murder mystery, don't get me wrong, this book just wasn't for me. But maybe you would like it. A Talent for Murder, Peter Swanson, if you're interested in reading. All right, that's going to do it for my Book of the Month Club review today. Please stay tuned. I get to choose my next book for July on July 1st. So we will have to see what book that is. I do a lot of reading because not only do I do this book of the month, but also I am in a horror book club that is put on by my local library. Yes, if you haven't gotten your library card, you should. Also, I am part of a sci-fi book club that is once a month as well. So I read a lot of books, as you can tell. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Miss La-Di-Da. Ta-ta for now.